And I'm joined now by the HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It's great to have you here. You've just unveiled this new report, and a lot of it focuses on chronic disease in children, which in part, when you read into this, essentially says that you believe a lot of that has to do with ultra-processed foods, chemical exposures, lack of physical activity, stress, and excessive use of prescription drugs. If people are reading this and say, okay, but what are the solutions to fix that? What would you say?
Well, this exercise was really a diagnostic exercise. And it's important because this has never happened in the federal government, where you have all the agencies recognizing we have a chronic disease crisis. And President Biden did his HHS directives. The word chronic disease was never mentioned. And so and my uncle tried to do this in 1962 after Rachel Carson's book came out. And unfortunately, he was killed before that. For 60 years, we've been waiting for the government to recognize that there's a crisis in chemical exposures and the increase in chronic disease. This was important for that, but this was just the diagnostics. 60 days from now, we put out the prescription. So we will put out a series of policies to address this issue and to eliminate the chronic disease epidemic.
Yeah, but I'm sure you've been thinking about this. I mean, a lot of these are things that you've been saying for years now.
Yeah, and we're already doing it. I mean, we were already getting rid of the food dyes. We're changing the SNAP program so that, we now are handling a tsunami of applications by the states to give them SNAP waivers, so to get sodas and candies off of SNAP. We're reviewing the dietary guidelines, and we're going to have those out by August. And the dietary guidelines under President Biden were 453 pages, and they were basically a product of the same kind of industrial impulses that put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid.
But you're saying in 60 days, people should expect to see concrete solutions of how these things can be solved?
We're already reviewing the GRAS standards, the generally recognized as safe standards. So we've done more in 100 days than my predecessors have done in decades in terms of redressing the causes of this problem. So, and we're going to keep doing that. We're not waiting for this to come out, but we are going to do comprehensive diagnostics across the entire government of what each of these agencies need to be doing to end the epidemic.
Well, and you're talking about working with other agency heads. The EPA is also on your commission, and as part of this, Lee Zeldin was there in the room. Your report says that kids are exposed to harmful environmental toxins and microplastics. I wonder how you square that with some moves that we've seen the EPA take to roll back or to weaken rules that limit forever chemicals in drinking water, which obviously would be one of those issues.
We're working very hard on PFAS. A lot of what you read about EPA's regulations, rolling back regulations on PFAS, is not true. PFAS is something I've been working on for years. I was part of the trial team in the first case against PFAS, and it is a priority for my agency. It's also a priority for Brooke Rollins at USDA, because the PFAS is now on farm crops. And we're going to do everything in our power to limit the proliferation of PFAS in the environment and limit its use as in manufacturing.
So it sounds like you don't think that those rules should be weakened or rolled back or postponed, as some of the instances have shown.
I can't talk to the details of what's come out of EPA on that issue. I know that I've asked Lee about it 2 days ago, and he said everything that we've been reading about it is wrong, that he's committed to regulating PFAS and PFOAs.
Yeah, I haven't seen them say otherwise publicly, but I think it would just raise questions of, the EPA is promising this huge environmental rollback. How does that coincide with what you'd like to see happen here? People may say, is the left hand talking to the right hand on achieving these goals?
The rollbacks that Lee is trying to is orchestrating there are designed to restart industrial policy. And he recognizes, many people do in this government, that economic prosperity in our country is also a social determinant of health. We found that out during the pandemic when we put people out of work and our chronic disease exploded. So we need a strong economy. We need a balance where there's a strong economy, but also those constituents and ingredients and residues that are hurting American health, and we get rid of them, and that is what the report will do in 60 days.
On ultra-processed foods and getting into that here, you were born into a privileged background, obviously not something you can control, but I wonder what you would say to maybe a single mom of 2 kids who's reading this report about how harmful these cheap but very accessible foods are for her family, and saying, well, you know, sometimes that's the best we can do, and that's why that's what's on the food or at the table at the end of the day, or that's what's in their lunchbox.
It's an illusion to think that processed food is cheap, because you end up paying for it with diabetes. You end up paying for it with autoimmune dysregulation, with mitochondrial dysfunction, with inflammation, and you end up paying much higher costs in the long run.
But they're not paying.
Now, there
for
are
at the
food
grocery
deserts
store,
in this country
Yeah.
where people at this point have a hard time getting access. I met with the health technology companies this week, and it was an extraordinary meeting, and one of the statements they made is that there's no place in this country, in the lower 48, where you can't get access to good foods. It's not easy access, as had been in the past, and that's been part of the economic drivers, and also the fact that people don't understand that these processed foods are poison.
But
They're more and more, and you're watching
somewhere.
companies now that are changing their ingredients because of this movement, that are making good food more available to Americans because they're demanding it. There was no demand for it before. This report is about getting every American to demand the accessibility to good whole food in their neighborhoods. And that, you know, it's going to be a process, but it's already happening. You see these big fast food conglomerates that are switching from seed oils to beef tallow fat. You see them reducing the ingredients. You see Chobani yogurt changing its ingredients because of the demand that has happened because of the MAHA movement. We are going to make sure they have apps that mothers who go into the grocery store have an app that they can send a flash on the barcode of every product and get a green light, red light, or yellow light. That will allow them
HHS is creating that?
We're working with industry to do it, and they're already doing it. You know, Mark Hyman's company has done it. Patrick Sonsingh's company has done it. There are many, many apps out there that I use one called Yucca. That is my wife and I consider it invaluable. You can go into any grocery store, flash it at any product, and you can get a go or a no on it. And as that happens, the market, we're not trying to create an anti-state here. We're trying to drive market forces that will drive change in the kind of food Americans get through good information and good science.
In anticipation of this report, there was a lot of pushback from farmers, agricultural groups. I know you heard from some Republican senators up on Capitol Hill who were worried about what it would mean for pesticides, ones that have been approved already by the EPA. I want to get your response to what one Illinois farmer, who is also the National Corn Growers Association president, Kenneth Hartman Jr., he told the Wall Street Journal, if the administration's goal is to bring more efficiency to government, then why is the MAHA Commission duplicating efforts by raising questions about pesticides that have been answered repeatedly through research and reviews by the EPA?
There's nothing in this report that will worry the American farmer. The person who made that statement had never seen the report. So
you won't reverse anything the EPA has approved?
Listen, we consider, and I said this during the 2.5 years that I was running for president, farmers in this country are in trouble. You know, and I met with farmers in Texas and the Midwest this week, and they consistently told me 7 out of every 10 years we are losing money. If we lose the farmers, the MAHA agenda is bankrupt. We need the farmers as partners. We need to keep them in business. We don't want to put a single farmer out of business. What we want to do is create incentives and innovation to allow them to innovate themselves, to use less chemical intensive, but we're not a nanny state. We're not going to coerce people. We're not going to tell them what to do. We're going to give them the opportunity. And we found in the farm community that the majority of farmers, they are the original environmentalists. They want to produce healthy food, and we need to give them the ability to do that and the economic incentives and the technology we already have healthy food. We need to produce the best food that we can possibly, and continue to do that.
You mentioned your presidential run, and some farmers may look at that and be skeptical of what you're saying, because you made comments like saying that you could weaponize the other agencies against chemical agriculture by doing good science on the chemicals that you say are poisoning us, high fructose corn syrup, and it's linked to the obesity epidemic. So if they're worried you're going to weaponize other agencies against them.
And that's, processed food. And I think we've all agreed that processed food is not a good thing for human health, and that we're driving a diabetes epidemic. Caitlin, when I was a kid, my uncle was president. The average pediatrician at that time saw one case of juvenile diabetes in his lifetime over a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 38% of teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door has that, and it's costing us $1 trillion a year just for that kind of mitochondrial dysfunction. It's bankrupting our country. It's making it 75% of American kids can't qualify for military service.
Let me ask you about something you said when you were on Capitol Hill this week. You were asked about the lead crisis in Milwaukee schools. You told Congress, quote, "We have a team on the ground in Milwaukee." The city said that's not true and that they are still not getting the help that they want from the CDC. Do you know who is on the ground? Who
The
were you under the impression
CDC
was
is
on the
giving them
ground?
assistance with their labs, their analytics, and advice.
They just said one technician was on the ground.
I can't tell you how many are on the ground in the city of Milwaukee, but I can tell you we are there.
But you don't know how many.
I can't tell you how many right now.
So, this is from the Milwaukee
82,000.
Health
We're
Commissioner
62,000
and Senator Tammy
employees.
Baldwin. Yeah.
You could read my other exchanges with Tammy Baldwin, and anyway, I'm not necessarily believing what Senator Baldwin.
So you're
is.
disputing and saying that there are more than one CDC employees on the
Like I
ground.
said, we have 62,000 employees. I'm not sure how many we have deployed to Milwaukee. I'm happy to check and give you that information.
And are you committed to helping with the schools there? Because obviously they're having a real issue with this, and say
Of course,
it's really affecting
I've
the
been
students.
working on lead in the schools including in Milwaukee, for 40 years. It is a crisis in our country. 44% of black youth in our municipalities have dangerous levels of lead in their blood, and that is crippling them for a lifetime potentially. So it's an issue that is foremost on my mind. It's a high priority, and it's something we'll continue to be involved with.
Okay, and we're talking about the big release of this report today. The next report that you've said that you'll produce is in September, when you want to determine the cause of autism. Do you still plan to know the cause of autism?
The dietary
by then?
guidelines come out in August, and the second stage of this report also comes out in August.
Okay, so that's in August. But this would be in September, when you said that you would be able to determine what the cause of autism is. Is that still the timeline that you are sticking with?
We will have some studies completed by September. And those studies will mainly be replication studies of studies that have already been done. We're also deploying new teams of scientists, 15 groups of scientists. We're going to send those grants out to bid within 3 weeks.
Why would you replicate studies that have been done?
Because the only way you can get good science is through replication. If you don't have replication, you don't know whether other scientists looking at the same data will arrive at the same conclusion. Good science always includes replication. In fact, we're changing the procedures at NIH so that up to 20% of the funding at NIH is for replication. If you don't have replication, you have incentives to cheat, and there's a lot of cheating that goes on in science.
Okay, but some people might dispute that, but looking at your April 10th comments when you were inside the cabinet meeting, you said by September we will know what has caused the autism epidemic and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
We'll have some of the information. To get the most solid information, it will probably take us another 6 months.
Okay, so parents should not expect to know what causes autism by September anymore.
We'll see. We're going to, as I said, we're going to replicate some of the studies that have already been done that look like sound studies, and we'll know a lot from those, and then we'll know a lot more afterward.
But not the definitive answer by September, just to be clear, because it matters.
It depends what those replicable studies show.
Okay, and then what do you expect to happen 6 months after that? You mentioned something
I
else in
expect
6
we will
months.
know the answers of the etiology of autism.
Okay, so that timeline is moving from September to 6 months
As
after
I said,
September.
we're going to begin to have a lot of information by September. We're not going to stop the studies in September. We're going to be definitive, and the more definitive you are, the more it drives public policy.
Okay, so that would put us at what, March next year? You say you'll know the cause of it?
As I said, it's about 6 months after September. A lot of these studies will begin coming back.
You also said something recently when you were on Capitol Hill and you were being asked about vaccines and whether or not you would recommend them for people out in the United States. And you said that people should not take medical advice from you. You are the HHS secretary, though, and your job is to create guidance and to talk about vaccines and medical testing. Why should people not take medical advice from you?
They probably shouldn't take medical advice from any HHS secretary. Very few of the HHS secretaries historically, I think maybe 10 or 20%, 15% have been doctors. People were asking me, I was responding to a question about my personal health choices. And I said, that's not relevant because people should not make their decisions based upon my personal health choices. We have an infrastructure. We have an advisory committee on immunization practices that makes recommendations. It's a group of scientists that looks at reams of data, and that's where our recommendations come from, not from an individual.
But you're leading
It's
all
time,
of those
you know,
agencies.
one of the big mistakes that you and many other of your media colleagues made during COVID is to try to convince the American people that they should trust the experts. Trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism. What we should do is trust the science. And we are going to do the science, and the science is going to be replicable, and it's going to be gold standard so that parents can make their own choices about what is best for their family and their health.
But I think people, the message was to trust the science and what studies were finding and what people
During
were
COVID,
seeing.
that was a bad message. No, it was trust the experts. That's what you kept telling us. Trust the experts.
I don't know that I ever said that.
Well,
I mean, we talked to the officials. Actually,
your
during
network
COVID,
was saying it every day.
we took the briefings live every day with all of the experts that President
The
Trump.
experts,
Those were
but you
President
weren't
Trump's
looking at the
doctors.
science.
But those were the people President Trump brought out to the briefings.
Well, President Trump brought, and I can.
He
if
brought
you
Dr.
want to go
Fauci
chapter
and
and
Dr.
verse, I
Birx.
can tell you what President Trump did right and what President Biden did wrong. What I'm saying to you.
But I want to get back to what your comment was about that. You said that people should not take your medical advice.
Yeah,
That's your position?
Yeah, absolutely. People should not be taking medical advice from somebody who is not a physician, but they should also be skeptical about any medical advice. They need to do their own research. You're a mom. If you're a mom, you do your own research on your baby carriage, on your baby bottles, on your baby formula.
But they don't have medical degrees, obviously. If you're a mom and you're looking at what science has been tested, they trust their doctors and their pediatricians.
One of the responsibilities of
OBGYNs.
living in a democracy where physicians and every sort of expert are subject to all kinds of biases. One of the responsibilities of living in a democracy is to do your own research and to make up your own mind.
So that's your message to moms or to anyone is to do your own research.
I would say be skeptical of authority. My father told me that when I was a young kid. People in authority lie. And we've seen a lot of that in our country. And people in the media lie. And people need to make their own judgments and be skeptical and maintain their capacity for critical thinking. And that was shut down during COVID. And the media was complicit in that.
Disagree on that last part. Secretary Kennedy, thank you for your time.
Good to meet you, Caitlin.
I wonder, was it surprising to hear you hear the HHS Secretary double down on saying that people should not listen to his medical advice?
It wasn't surprising because he has said this before, and he's right that most secretaries have not been physicians. But at the same time, as you sort of alluded to during the interview, he is essentially the CEO of the largest health enterprise in the world. So his words definitely matter. And he is out there, making recommendations on all sorts of different things, from infectious diseases to food dyes, all these sorts of things. So, he's got a lot of policy power. Unlike the Surgeon General, who's sort of the nation's doctor, he has policy mandate powers. So it's surprising in that regard. I think he's trying to disentangle his own personal health choices versus his role as the Secretary of Health.
Well, and in that role as Secretary of Health, back in April, he said that a new effort that they were going to carry out would, he said, find the cause of autism, the autism epidemic, as he called it, by September. Now he seems to be saying that that is slipping, and he thinks that they would know more definitively by March of next year. Do you think that that is possible? What do you make of that timeline changing?
It certainly wasn't realistic by September, and it's still not realistic by March. I mean, Caitlin, there have been studies that have been decades-long studies following kids who've been vaccinated, following kids who have not been vaccinated, and really looking into, the potential causes of autism. These are international studies. First thing he said to you in that interview was that the existing studies, many of which have been done, again, over decades, need to be replicated. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that. If he means, look at the data and have someone else analyze the data, or if he really means what he said, which is that the studies need to be replicated, that would take a long time. I think what you're starting to hear from him, but also, I think importantly from the head of the NIH, is that maybe by September, they might have a framework in place to actually start to talk about what kind of studies need to be done. So, we'll see. But I think anybody that you've talked to that has studied this for a long time thinks that these timeframes that are being put out there are really unrealistic, even with the additional 6 months.
The other thing he said that stood out was what's happening in Milwaukee right now, as the city there and officials there are disputing that there are people from the CDC, a team of people helping with lead contamination in schools. I know you've done reporting on this, Sanjay. What is happening? What is the reality?
Well, look, and I covered Flint as well, so we got a good idea of sort of what happens if you call the feds when something like that's unfolding in your city. What happens? At that point, they sent in these deployment teams into Flint. They created testing centers. They had epidemiologists on the ground. They were doing all that stuff. They still have a registry in Flint to continue to track lead poisoning. That was the same sort of teamwork that they expected in Milwaukee. And I spoke to the health commissioner there who said, look, we first called in March about getting help. April 3rd, we basically heard that department no longer existed. I was there a couple of weeks ago to ask again what was going on at that point. Again, same answer. The world's best and brightest lead experts from the CDC were no longer available. They weren't even answering the phone. And then, in response to just the last couple of days, we checked back in again with Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Health Department. And this is what they said. I don't know if we have the statement, but I can read it to you. They basically said that Secretary Kennedy's statement is inaccurate. The City of Milwaukee Health Department is not receiving any federal epidemiological or analytical support related to this lead crisis, essentially. So I don't know exactly what he's referring to. There was one person on the ground there that was a person who was scheduled to be on the ground already, even before this lead crisis sort of really took off, to help with analytics overall. But this is not at all the deployment teams that you're used to seeing, the disease detective, the epidemiologist, the people who specialize in testing, who typically show up in situations like this. So on one hand, Secretary Kennedy, and I think honestly, is saying he cares deeply about things like lead and heavy metals because he has a track record of talking about these things. But that's not happening right now in Milwaukee. They're not getting federal support, and that's been validated and confirmed by talking to people on the ground there.
Yeah. Clearly a lot of tension between him and Senator Tammy Baldwin as well. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, as always, great to have you. Thank you.